live with Jack Joseph Puig. I hope you've been enjoying our webinar series, and we're looking forward to Jack, and he will answer all of your questions. Feel free to ask your questions in the chat. And yeah, Jack, if you wish to start, we're live.
Thank you. So thanks everyone for coming on. I'm going to go through a bunch of questions here and do my best to answer them. I see the first one.
We're looking forward to
let's see here.
Jack. Yeah.
I'm going to turn this down. Okay. So the first one I see here is asking about NS10s. And the question is to do with power amplifier on NS10s. And it's asking if there's any hints or things that you can do better with NS10s. And that's from HVY. And there is, actually. With NS10s, the most important thing about NS10s, and this is going to sound very obvious, but very true, is the power amplifier. The best pair of NS10s I've ever experienced was at a recording studio that no longer exists called Devonshire. And they were using a phase linear, believe it or not, 750, which is 750 watts, which is way, way, way beyond what you would ever need for a pair of speakers like that. But let me just add this: the second best pair of NS10s I ever heard, which is what I'm using, is a Crown DC300, which is 150 watts aside. Why the power is so important is just for headroom, just for peak-to-peak information. So when you have a bass drum or a snare drum or a percussion or a beat, whatever it is that demands a very quick rise time, wants a lot of attack, you need to have that extra headroom so the speaker can actually push out that waveform, that information, in such a way that you actually can hear the kind of peak that you have. Even if you were to lower the volume, one of the things about when you're adjusting peak information on anything, meaning like a transient designer, smack attack, anything that you're using to add attack, if you can turn the volume way down low, you can really hear actually how much attack you're adding compared to what the original signal was. Because the louder you get, the harder it is on the system, right? Therefore, if you get into the headroom of the system, it doesn't have the ability to push out the attack because it's just bottoming out effectively. So that's why, in connecting these two things, the reason why you want the power is so that it can actually produce the peak information that you need. And secondly, of course, you're not going to push it hard because you don't want to blow the speakers up. But if you're at a low level, then there's a lot of headroom. Bass response is great. High frequency sounds more beautiful. There's less harmonic distortion, less power amp distortion. The power rail and the amplifier is not giving out. Everything about it makes sense. So that's my question on my answer, I should say, on the NS10s. Let's see, we got another question here. Looking through. So from the Bruley brothers, hi Jack. Hope you're doing fine. How do you avoid phase issues when using parallel processing compressor or EQ? That can be tough. And it's why I do a lot of my parallel compression actually outside the digital domain. Thank God that Pro Tools did what they did with for us being able to align. But the truth is, if you really get the best phase coherency, which is what you're talking about, when you do it in the analog domain. There are some plugins you'll find just because of the processing, and whatever you compute power, there's a lot of reasons why, right? That you can't ever get around that. And in that case, you're going to have to come up with another way, another compressor, another equalizer, another whatever you're using for your parallel compression. So Alec asks, my 11-year-old daughter is here watching too. She's a generation of audio recordist. She would like to know if you could only mix one gender of music, what would it be? And what is your Frozen character? I can't give you a name for the Frozen character, unfortunately. I only have seen Frozen a few times, so I don't feel qualified to answer that in a great way. In terms of gender, that's a little, it's an interesting thing, because I've worked on all different kinds of music, and actually I was thinking about it today. I haven't worked on a lot of country, but I've had a lot of success in country. And I was asking myself, why have you had so much success in country, considering that you've primarily been a guy who's worked in the pop world and in the rock world, in the alternative world, and in the hip hop world, but very little in country, practically zero in jazz, actually. And I think the answer is that because I'm really a song-driven person, I've always listened to the song, and the song is actually what drives me and actually what makes me understand, even when I have a mix that's correct. Meaning that if I start working on a song, and after a period of time, I start really noticing exactly what people are talking about in the song, and actually getting an understanding on a different level. All of a sudden, maybe a line or two, or maybe the second verse didn't make total sense to me, but all of a sudden it's making total sense and I'm getting the whole picture. That's when I know I'm honing in on the mix. Somehow, how that's being framed, meaning all the musical elements, the arrangement, the architecture of the song from an arrangement standpoint, is obviously working. And that's when I know I'm getting it right. So I don't think of it in terms of, hey, I only want to do a rock record, I only want to do a country record, I only want to do a pop record. I just want to do songs, great songs. There's nothing like that. And I have always felt that since I can remember. So one of the questions here from, looks like Fahrenheit, if I said that right. Very important one. How many points can a mixer get in a record? I can only find the answer to 1%. Could that change my mix? Yes, you can definitely get anywhere from 1% to 4%. 100% depends on your track record and your success and how bad they want you. People will always pay for something if they really want it. And that happens in all of pop culture. There are people who are willing to pay $1,000 for an iPhone, and there are people who say, I want to pay $300, so I'm going to buy a lower end Android phone. So 100% about how much they want to pay for something. The highest I know of is 5%, but that would be somebody who has an incredible track record and they really, 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 really want somebody. 1% is on the lower side, and 2 to 2.5 is the norm. But again, you have to have a name and a reputation. From Polo, looks like here. Jack, thank you very much for the opportunity. What is the best compressor? Why, and any tips? I don't know if there's a best compressor, but I would say this. If I was in a desert island and I can only have one compressor, in a perfect world, it'll be the Fairchild. The Fairchild is extremely versatile and is, of course, a tone monster. It's a beautiful sounding compressor. Can be very attacky, can be very grand, depending on how you set the settings. So it's fairly versatile. Now that I say that, I mean, a close second is probably an 1176, because I could probably make an 1176 do everything a Fairchild can do, except from a tone standpoint, it's not quite as good as a great sounding Fairchild. And I add one more thing in terms of Fairchild. I've said this before, but it's true. For some reason, the B-side sounds better than the A-side generally. Don't understand it, don't know why. It's an observation. I've said once, I've said it twice, I've said it 4 times. A large part of intelligence and a large part of what we do is observation, continually observing. And what you do with that information is key. But if you're not if you're not observating carefully, then you're probably not reacting properly to what is there. And so, a little bit of a side point, but an important one. Let's see what else we have here. Says from Chris here, hey Jack, do you still do 3 different compressors on each of the aux that feed mixed buses in different flavors? And have you switched from up the compressors on each? So yes, I do different compressors. And you know what's interesting is years and years ago, in fact, Glenn John's son, Ethan Johns, once said to me that he thought it was a compliment. He said, one of the best things I think about you is that you don't continually just sit. You're always trying things. And I never forgot that. I think a large part of what makes all this fun for us is the fact that we have all these different choices of what we can do, whether that be in the digital domain or the analog domain or a combination of both. And the fact that you're doing a constant search, we'll call it discovery, is a large part of what's fun about what we do and a large part of the wonderment of it all. You know, finding the magic, trying to catch the butterfly, trying to make something that's unique, something that's amazing, something that's different. I think it's part of the reason why I do get a little bit concerned, and please don't take what I'm going to say wrong, and just listen before you draw a conclusion. But I think it's part of the reason why I get a little bit concerned / frustrated with the idea of templates. Now, of course I have a template, and of course I've changed my template, and even all the way back to the very beginning when I was working just on a recording console, period, for the most part, and basically Pro Tools was the tape machine effectively. Of course we had templates, right? But the reason why you had templates then is primarily because you wanted to get to a place where you knew where everything was without thinking about it. You know, so you always made a certain channel this, and a certain channel that, and a certain channel this, so that you could just intuitively go there without thinking about it, so it would keep you in that creative space. Now, I know with templates, what can happen is it can make you lazy, right? Because you have all these certain delays, all these certain reverbs, all these certain channels set up, all these auxes set up, all these master faders set up, kind of a system. And okay, that's great, don't misunderstand me. But you decrease the accident factor, or you can become satisfied too quick. You know, a delay or a reverb or something that you've already had set up can satisfy you and may stop you from hunting a little bit. So you gotta like really think about not making yourself be a slave to the template. Again, the template's so important. It allows you to go quickly, fast. It allows you to deal with your workload sometimes that can be fairly expansive, and so you need a system to move quickly. And going back to what I said about the recording console, the intuitive part of knowing where things are. Oh, red is always this, green is always this, blue is always that. Oh, my reverbs are always at the end with my delays, or my master faders are over here, or however you're setting up your template. Extremely important because it allows you to be intuitive, move quick, and not have to be in that intellectual, non-creative brain space. I get that. I understand that. Look, I think in our business and in our world, to constantly talk in any kind of absolutes is actually bordering on retarded and lazy, right? Because art isn't something that's static, it's dynamic. Everything is dynamic. It's always moving, it's always changing. You get something to work on that's like, oh, I never would have thought of doing it that way, or this is different, or that's different. So being able to pivot and change quickly is important. So you got to find that place where you're not a slave to that template. You understand it's there, just like your Pro Tools rig is there, or your Ableton rig is there, or your console is there, whatever you're using is there, but you're not a slave to it. You understand that you're the master, and you're going to allow yourself to experiment and to not always just go to that exact same thing, but try something different. In other words, be creative. From Juan, hello JGP, thank you for doing this. What do you think about the future of the recording studio business and where it's going to go to? I think it's going to grow. I know that's possibly counterintuitive to answer it that way. It might seem a little bit nuts. But if you look at what's happening with streaming, right? Streaming, when it first came, none of the record labels wanted to embrace it. I tried so hard to get certain record labels to buy streaming companies. Even management companies I met with gave them ideas of how we should buy this streaming company or that streaming company and what we should do with those streaming companies and how to serve artists. And I've seen so many ideas that I was pitching 7 years ago now come to life. But what it has done is it's flooded all the rights owners, all the labels and publishing companies with tremendous amount of income, crazy amounts of income. Now what we have to hope for is as that income comes in and becomes great, they pass it on to the creatives. So maybe before where they would have thought, well, let's not really spend a lot of money on this mix, this single, this artist, they'll feel like, okay, I can spend a little bit more money because I have a larger margin. And if that's true, which I think is going to happen, and I kind of already see the very beginning of this, I see the willingness of them willing to spend more money, so will everything come with it. Now, the question about private record studios, private mixing environment as opposed to commercial environment as we know it, the big studio on 42nd Street in New York, or Hyde Street in London, or Sunset Boulevard in Los Angeles, that's a little questionable. It'll still grow, but that'll really be driven by how much live recording we do to records not being made with live recording. I know that people really like the communal experience. If I had any disappointment about less record studios, less record recording, meaning working in recording studios, is not having that 1-to-1 or 1-to-5, 1-to-10 communication. Listening to people make observations and being able to react to those observations. Even if something is said that's incorrect, it actually might make you think of something else that is correct. So I miss that very much. But I don't see this as the collapse of the record studios we know it. I think we've seen a reaction literally to the financing of all record companies in terms of what they've been able to make. When the CD died, and then later on iTunes, and it keeps going, that's had a big effect to their bottom line. But streaming is coming on hardcore for them financially. So I see it positive. I'm excited. Okay, I'm looking at the question here. Okay, it says here from Mr. Reed, how do you have outboard gear routed in your studio? Do you have a patch bay with output set to particular pieces of outboard so they remain attached? Okay, so that's a very good question. Yes, I do have a patch bay. I'm not sure what you're seeing in your screen, but there is a patch bay to my left. And then some of it is available in the patch bay, and some of it is hardwired. The stuff is hardwired is because it's stuff that I think just seems to work most of the time. Not all the time, but more than not. Now, how I get around the not of the more and not is to have additional versions of that. So For instance, I have a pair of Collins 26U compressors I like a lot. And I have a pair of equalizers on those that I think really sound great, and so on and so forth. And that will be a particular path that lives, that gets sent by a pair of buses that are always there, and have multiple versions of that. And then I will sometimes go, well, no, you know what, this is not really working, that's not really working. Why do I think it's not working? Okay, I need to create another chain, and I'll create the other chain. It sort of ties a little bit about what I was saying earlier in terms of not getting stuck. You can get stuck with chains as well. Well, this always works on the bass, this always works on the voice, this always works on my beat, this always works on an 808. Maybe not. You don't have no idea how any of that was processed. And maybe you're under or over processing. Or maybe, by the way, you don't even need to process. Maybe it's just a little bit of something. Next question. Any tips for analog color boxes that aren't as expensive as a Fairchild? And that's by Angelo. Oh my gosh, there's nothing that doesn't color. You know, even DSP colors, as you know. And you can make DSP plugins color. In other words, if you take, as an example, if you take, let me think of a good example. I'm trying to think of a really good example, but let me just say, you can take the input or an output, right, of a plugin and alter it. I mean, a good example, I guess now as I think about it, would be I think the Focusrite's a good example. I was really trying to think of a really, really good one that's obvious, which is why it's taken me a minute to give you a good one. The Focusrite Red equalizer. You would be surprised how different you can make it sound just moving the input or the output level, input in particular. And so that's an example where you could do it actually with a plugin. As you can see here in the video, there's a tremendous amount of outboard equipment here. And a large part of that is using it for color. Sometimes I've always liked doing that. And I think that that's a really good way to actually create attitude. You know, if you think about the way we record, right, we might use, you know, a 606, a 707, an 808, a 909, so on and so forth. We might use a Telecaster guitar, a Stratocaster, a Singleton snare drum, a Ludwig snare drum, you know, a 251 for a voice, a U47 for a voice, a brand new microphone for a voice. I mean, the list goes on. A certain direct box that you might like, or a transformer in a direct box that you found that sounds really great. All that's color. So there's no reason when you get to the mixing point that you shouldn't stay in that space. Now, one of the places I think you can go wrong is not paying attention to the color that was already created. And you must consider that the ultimate way of making records and recording is always working to the mix. We all know that. I mean, the tape machine was the ultimate example of that because, of course, you stuck it on the tape and that was it. Now with Pro Tools or any DAW, we have the ability to manipulate that. Good things and bad things about that. Bad thing would be you don't make a commitment. And so you're not working to an end. You should always be working to an end. You should always have a vision from the very beginning of what you want to make, what you want it to feel like, what's the mood you're trying to convey, what's the attitude you're trying to get across, what are the lyrics, who is the artist, what do they like, what do they like as people, what are they trying to convey. Your job is to facilitate that. Now, sometimes things alter, things change. People can come back and say, look, I rewrote the bridge, or I changed this, or I changed that, or I want to change the tempo, or I want to do this, I want to do that. Then, of course, the manipulation ability is beyond amazing and fantastic. But something that Glenn John said to me years ago, I'll never forget, is you don't always need to be on a rescue mission. And that really resonated with me. He's right. You don't always need to be on a rescue mission. Sometimes it doesn't need to be rescued. Sometimes being in that rescue mission attitude makes you actually leave behind something that was fantastic, that was beautiful. And hopefully, if it's done properly from the beginning, and I'm talking from a mixing standpoint, the artist and the record producer and the people involved that made that record have an intent. And why should you not honor that intent? Who made you God? Who made you think that you're going to alter everything around? Maybe it shouldn't be altered. These are something that, why the instinct in your creative world is so important, because you need to be able to read, as they say, read the room right. You got to read what someone made right. You have to pay attention to the rough mix. You have to pay attention to what it is. Keep in mind, with modern record making, you're constantly updating. Every day you come in, you pull up what you're working on, you listen to it, you alter it, you add this plugin, you take this plugin off, you do this, you do that. So you're always working to make something great. So it's not like you get to the end, okay, now mix it, okay, change everything, take everything off. Well, how does that work? This is not a tape recording. This is a work in progress mentality that we have now. So sometimes it doesn't need to be rescued. If I was going to say when it needs to be the most rescued is when someone just wasn't hearing right. They were in an environment where they were making wrong decisions because they were being lied to by the speakers, lied to by the room, lied to by the environment. That's a whole different thing. And sometimes you look at something like that where you're noticing there's way too much of this or that over the entire thing. And that tells you, like, okay, they weren't hearing correctly. And so now that becomes a rescue mission in terms of fixing the overall bandwidth issues that might exist because they weren't hearing correctly. All right, let's go to another question. It says here from Jorge, hello GGP, what do you think about your Puig Child and Puig Tech plugins and how do they compare to the hardware? I think they're extremely close. I had the good fortune of catching the very tail end of there being multiple Pultecs and multiple Fairchilds to pick from. And the Fairchild that was chosen to make the Puig Child was 100% one out of many that I had heard that I knew was really, really magical and had the right thing, the right dust, the right magic juice. Same thing with the Pultec. I think it's very, very close. Is it identical to hardware? Of course not. But one could argue in some ways it's better. If you listen to the Puig Child and put it on something, is there hum? Is there noise? Is there hiss? Absolutely. When I first received the first version of it, it didn't have any of that. And I spent a year, exactly 1 year to the day practically, tuning all the digital parameters to be able to create what I thought was a good facsimile of what that device sounds like and feels like. I don't have any regrets about either one of them. I think they're both great. If the only regret I have is there is a knob that says 50 and 60 hertz, and that's not what I wanted. I wanted the 50 hertz to say British, and I wanted the 60 hertz to say American, to represent the two different actually styles of how 50 hertz equipment sounds and 60 hertz equipment sounds, meaning that gear actually sounds different if it's being driven by a 50 hertz or a 60 hertz cycle. But there were too many complaints from the beta testers saying, well, what about the Scandinavian sound? What about the, Peru sound? What about the German sound? And I just thought that was not a good response, and I was disappointed. So they took off the American and British selection. That's my only disappointment. Let's see if I can find something here from Michael. It says, aside from templates, what are some more habits you have in the process of helping accommodate instinct over intellect? This is something I've talked about, you've talked about for a few years, and it's great advice. I think I kind of touched on that earlier. I think I've answered that question fairly in depth. But instinct is everything. Now, let me just say this. There's no question, and I've said this before, that what we do for a living is kind of like the other woman, the other partner, however you want to look at it. Meaning that we're obsessed with it. We sit at a dinner table, we sit at a baseball game, at a friend's house, at a gig, whatever it is, and we're constantly thinking about, maybe I should do this, maybe I should try that, maybe I should think that. What about if I plug this into this? It's constantly on our mind. Why I say that is, that's a lifestyle. This is a lifestyle choice. It's not a job. If you want to be really great and really succeed, you have to never say no, never stop. You have to be obsessed. That's what it takes to be someone that you think is really great at what they do, that you admire. They're obsessed with really, really, really doing a great job. So how that relates to the instinct question is, that means you need to be constantly doing that all the time. So the analogy I've spoken about before, which I believe he's relating to, that he's talking about, is always listening to your instinct. Gee, I shouldn't sit in this chair. I should sit in this chair at the show. Or I'm not going to stand over there. For some reason, I think something's kind of weird. And of course, within 30 seconds, someone slips with a drink and it falls over the floor, and the three people standing there all get wet. And you're like, sure glad I wasn't standing there. Or, oh, I see this penny, I'm going to pick it up. Or, that looks slippery over there, I'm not going to walk. And you don't listen to it. You walk over there, and it was slippery, and you fall down, and you hurt yourself. And you're like, I knew that. I knew I shouldn't walk over there. You didn't listen to your instinct. If you keep listening to your instinct, you will empower it. And then all of a sudden, when you're working on things, you'll start getting gut feelings about things. Like, well, why did I pen that over there? I think I... Or something says, pen it over there. Or something says, put this on this, or put this equalizer, this compressor. And you're like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Like, I've never seen that on a YouTube video. I've never seen someone at Mix with Master say that. People that a magazine I read Tape Op, I did this, I did that. No one ever does that. But you try it and you're like, holy, you know what? That really works. That's your instinct telling your intellect to do something. Not your intellect making a decision because of your education, wherever you got it from. Instinct is everything. Pay attention to instinct. Grow your instinct. Empower it. Listen to it. It's so powerful. It's the most powerful thing in the world. Instinct will stop you from the worst emotion on the planet, which is regret. Because you knew better. When you have regret, you knew better. You just didn't listen to your instinct. Okay, another question here. Let's see here. From Colin, what's up, Jack? Thanks for doing this. I'm certainly quarantined and really making my day. Can you discuss different attack and release settings using compression for manipulation? I can, and anyone who knows me knows it's one of my obsessions. I think that everyone that does what I do for a living, including all of you, have certain things that you're attracted to and you're obsessed with. You know, there are certain people that are a certain kind of manufacturer. They love UA plugins or Waves plugins. Or no, I really like working on this DAW or that DAW, you know, or whatever it might be. Some people love certain manufacturers, an event need or API or whatever it might be, right? Some people like distortion, and that's a big part of how they do what they do. Or some people are obsessed with compression or cutting as opposed to boosting on equalization. You know, we all have our things that we kind of default to. And that kind of is what I've been saying a lot on this webinar, is trying to not always default. You know, try to get out of preset, in your own preset, into manual, so to speak, right? Try things, experiment. That's the beauty of this business, is that there are no absolutes. We're not punching a clock. We don't have to do it a certain way. That's the beauty of art. Remember, the definition of art is ever changing. It's constantly changing. What happened yesterday is not today. And that's the beauty of it. That's why we never get bored. That's why we are obsessed with it. And why we can work the crazy hours that we do. Because it's fun. Because it's ever changing. There are no rules. So going back to the question. Sorry I got off on a bit of a tangent there, but I get a little excited, as you can tell. So it has to do with shaping the sound. Attack and release shape the sound. What do I mean they shape the sound? They create what the duration of a sound is. You can make a sound for much longer or much shorter, depending on the release and the attack. And that is a very musical choice. The shorter something is, the faster something feels. The longer it is, the slower it feels, because it takes a longer time to hear the beginning of the sound to the end of the sound. It's just that simple. And how attacky something is, or how long something is, also affects how you perceive it in the musical bar line. And also how much attack different elements have, or how long different elements are. Also have to do with alignment, right? If the bass drum, let me pick a percussive element like a bass drum, if it's real attacky, you'll hear every particular little nuance of what it is. If it's a busy pattern, you'll feel all those subdivisions, which means it'll feel fast. It's straight fours on the floor, right? You can really hear where exactly all those quarter notes sit, and then how everything relates to those quarter notes. What the hi-hat feels like, or the shakers, or the beat, anything that's creating that subdivision. They all relate to each other. So it's a matter of aligning all those transients to create the feel that you want. And the alignment of those transients is done with compression. And whether it's smack attack, or a transient designer, or an 1176, or a Fairchild, whatever you want to pick, that's all aligning the sine waves, the attacks. And that's the art of compression. The art of compression is not volume, it's not level. It's taking the most dynamic tool out of our toolbox, much more dynamic than an equalizer, even more dynamic than distortion, and aligning all those attacks and releases so they're all firing together, or feeling or pulsating the way you want, right? You look at what's happened with electronic music, you know, with keying something. You know, originally the key input was used lots of times to turn something off or on. But as we started using all of that to make something duck and move compared to something else, that's kind of what I'm talking about, essentially, on steroids. So having something really pulsating a lot is the ultimate example of what I'm talking about. You've got two things now talking to each other, actually affecting each other. You go away when I go on, you go away when I go on. That's the ultimate example, I mean, an extreme example of what I'm talking about. Now, that can be a bit lazy too, because having something duck because something's playing, well, maybe they're not coexisting right because they're not equalized right or compressed right. That's a little bit of cheating too, unless you're actually wanting to make something duck and move because of a feel. That's a whole different thing. but it can also be lazy. So I'm going to turn the bass drum down every time the bass plays, or vice versa. Well, maybe they're both got too much of the same frequency, so they're just like canceling each other out. Maybe you haven't arranged them. Because remember, equalization and all of what we're talking about effectively is voicing. I'm going to put something at this part of the spectrum and something at this part of the spectrum so they can share the entire spectrum. They're not living in the exact same place. And that can actually happen even with an attack. So going back to the first part of the question, if you think about the attack of something, which you're controlling with the compressor, how you've set the attack and how you've set that release. Then there's also the frequencies of those attacks. Is that a real aggressive attack bright or dark? Because if it's dark, your ear is not going to perceive it the same way as if it's bright. So now you also need to not only align those attacks and releases, but also align them frequency-wise. If a shaker or a hi-hat, something real aggressive that you've really, really put the screws to, so to speak, and it's real attacky, and it's really bright, but you've done the same thing to a bass guitar, a bass drum, a piano, a loop, a beat, but it's not real bright. Of course the ear is going to hear the brighter thing first. So you have to keep that in mind. I mean, this conversation, it's a bit difficult to do as a conversation. Excuse me. You have to also do it by just trying it. And the best way to do it is to get really aggressive, like really, really dive into it, really go crazy. That's the best way to do it, because then you can really hear what it's doing. All right, let's go to another question here. This is a question here. I like this question because of what it can lead to. And the question here is from HVY again, HVY. For 30 years I've had an AMIC console. How important is a new power supply to my console? And that's very important, without a shadow of a doubt, because basically it's the blood to the system, the blood and vein. As far as the console or gear, and I want to say this, it's a little bit of a sideline, but I want to make this point. Here I am sitting in a sea of gear around me, and I can start talking about how it's all emotion and feel, and the gear doesn't matter. We've heard this quite a bit. But meanwhile, I'm sitting around all this gear, and that's something that's always bothered me when I've said it or I've heard anyone else say it. And I think the way we need to look at gear, obviously gear has a sound, and obviously we've already talked about different pieces of gear, but I think it's how it makes you feel is almost equally as important. And I'm not going to say it's more important, but I'm going to say it's very, very important. And the best analogy I can give is if I drive, I don't know, let's say I drive a truck, I feel one way when I'm driving that truck. If I'm in an SUV, I feel like I'm up high and I'm kind of, I'm up high, I'm safe. If I drive a Ferrari, I'm not going to feel the same way. If I drive a Porsche, I will drive faster, I'll take curves harder, I'll take more chances. It makes me feel different. And so when it comes to gear and equipment, if having that gear and equipment makes you feel more secure, if it makes you feel like you can do a better job, if it gives you confidence, it's 100% worth it, even if it wasn't even plugged in. And I think that's the way we got to look at gear. I don't think we should dismiss it. I think we have to look at it as it's different for everyone, and it affects everyone different. And there are no absolute answers whether it's good or bad, or whether you need it or not, or if it's a reason why something works. I think that's a very important message I want to send. All right, another question here. Okay, so Mateo asked me, can I explain when you would use mono reverb or stereo reverb? I use mono reverb when I want to really, really make something located. Let's call it positional audio for a moment. So if you have a vocal and you put a mono reverb on it and it's panned exactly where that voice is, that really makes the ear locate where that voice is even more. If you have a diffuse stereo reverb, it feels like, well, it's kind of coming from everywhere. It's coming from the right, it's coming from the left, it's coming from the center. It's kind of wide spectrum. It's very cinematic. It's very surround, which, of course, might be what you want. But if you have an instrument, you know, a hi-hat, a beat, a guitar, I don't know, whatever you want to pick, synth, a keyboard, something that's panned to the right and that has its own mono reverb, you will really hear it. Oh, it's right there. I can identify that that is right there, and this is right there, and that's right there. You know, I think sometimes a lot of us don't talk enough about panning. It's amazing what you can accomplish just with panning. You know, if you think about it, we get lazy. You know, hard left, center, hard right, a little this way, a little that way. But you know, you can take things and start arranging them in the panning field alone, which is effectively level, right? Where something sits from a panning perspective is level. It's not. It's the same thing as moving the volume on the fader effectively. So the reverb helps you locate and position something exactly where you want it. Especially if that reverb is real bright, it's actually like the same thing as adding a bunch of top end or mid range to a sound because you want to actually locate exactly where it is. All right, another question here. Looking through. So from Juan here, it says future recording studios. Okay, we answered that question. Looking down, looking for someone different here. Okay, it's asking me if I can talk more about my involvement with consumer grade speakers and high fidelity. That's from Mr. Reed again. That's a long conversation, but I'm working with every manufacturer that you know. I'm working with Facebook, Google, Dell, Apple, HTC, Motorola, SiriusXM, you name it. And I'm working with all the devices and trying to help them because I feel like I would like what we do to actually have a chance of being something that people can listen to. And I'm not even talking about this whole thing that a lot of people say where it's like, oh, how the artist intended it to be. You know, I think some of that sometimes is a lie because they make these things have a lot more bass or highs. And I think to myself, I know the record wasn't made that way. What I want to do is create honesty. And I want to create it, believe it or not, the most for consumers, for people who worked hard, who put the money down to buy something to listen to their content on, whether it be records, movies, broadcast, film, whatever it is. I would love it if they didn't have to put their phone inside of a cup. If they could actually listen to it and hear the instruments and hear their arrangement and hear what we did, because they're being robbed. And I hate the fact, as the dumb example, that Darth Vader on a phone sounds like Mickey Mouse. I'm not scared when I hear Darth Vader when he says, I'm going to kill you. It sounds like Mickey Mouse to me. I'm going to kill you. I'm not scared. And that's a shame because I know the hours that someone spent creating Darth Vader's sound of his voice, or the footsteps when someone's walking away, or the gunshot or something blowing up, you know, or the importance of a bass line that I can't even hear. So the chords aren't working the same way. Therefore, the melody's not coming off. Therefore, the attitude of what that song is not coming off, and the artist is being lost. I hate that. Can't stand that. Consumer products, for the most part, suck. And that is why I'm involved in that particular world. Next question. Hello, JGP. Thanks for doing this. I heard that you talk about the importance of getting the mid-range right. but I'm not entirely sure what that entails and how that's done in practice. This is from, looks like Mr. Overstead. Excuse me, by the way, if I say your name's wrong. I don't mean to, of course. Don't mean any disrespect there. So the reason why I talk about the mid-range is the mid-range is the only thing that's actually on every system. Every system effectively has 3K. Let's just call 3K mid-range for the sake of this conversation. But not every system has 30 hertz, I'm exaggerating, or 20K. So not only is the mid-range important, but it's where the intelligibility lives. It's where the diction lives. It's where I can hear the soul, the feeling, and the emotion of something. Now, I'm not saying that the low frequency, which is pelvic energy, of course, is not emotion. That would be a stupid thing to say. You know, or a high string line that lives way up high is not emotion. But if you have the mid-range right, you will get everything to be conveyed on almost any system. And you actually will find that when a mix is really done great, that you listen to it on different systems, and it always works. It works across everything, and that's because the mid-range is right. Mid-range is really, really important, and it's easy to get tricked. Mid-range can sometimes turn you off because it hurts your ears or doesn't feel right, or you think it needs to be more smiling, more poppy, because that's the sound, and that's what you're hearing or what's right. And I can understand how you can get misled. Mid-range is everything. The obsession of low end and highs will make you not focus on the mid-range. I'm not saying those other extremes are not important. Don't ignore the mid-range being right. Make sure that there is mid-range. Make sure I can hear the character in something. It's pretty much where it lives and lies. Of course, as I've said before, and I'll say it again, and I said earlier, can't talk in absolutes. So many things are subjective. There are no absolutes. There are no hard rules. That's also the beauty of it all. Okay, another question here. Adam asks me if I can talk about my mix bus processing. So behind me, again, I don't know what you guys can see exactly in your screen, but I have, actually I think I might, no, it doesn't really matter if I move. My mix bus moves around. I have 3 choices that I'm currently working with for the most part. And I think the mix bus is extremely important, might be the most important thing in your path, because it's sort of like the monitor. It allows what you're doing either to get through or not, right? I mean, it's just that simple. I know that sounds extremely like duh and basic, but it kind of is duh and basic. Now, my mix bus is something I spent a lot of time creating and playing with. Currently, for the most part, it has a tube output. So I found through a friend a pair of, believe it or not, old TIAC tape electronics that are tube, that are kind of modeled all after sort of the older Ampex tube electronics, but it's a different design. And it adds this lower octave just going through that's amazing. And basically it's some harmonic distortion, of course. I have an Allen Smart compressor that I've had from the very beginning. It's gray, not black. It's one of the very, very first ones. It's just a magic piece. I've tried to beat it. I've tried different things. I don't seem to be able to beat it. So it's a combination of an Allen Smart. I have a pair of Neve 1079s. And I have that tube electronics I talked to you about. Now, at the same time, if that doesn't work exactly the way I want, I have a pair of API transformers and API equalizers that can be a choice. And then I have my Neve choice, which is the Neve output amplifiers of a Neve stereo bus combined with a pair of Neve 1079s, and I can pick between those three or a combination thereof. And I always think that the stereo bus should, this is my personal opinion, and I don't know how anyone else would feel about this, but it's just my personal opinion. I think the stereo bus should almost be like makeup. You know, it's okay to have a little extra juice on the stereo bus. You know, it's okay to have a little boost in the low end, and maybe some boost in the top end, and a little extra color from the tube electronics I talked about, or solid state electronics, or transformers. You know, something that gives you immediate gratification. And why that's important is, as creative people, we always need confidence. We always need a reason to take a step. Artistic people, by design, are insecure. Any person who tells you what we do for a living, that they're not insecure, and they're all that, and they think they know everything, just turn them off. Don't pay attention anymore, because it's a lie. We're all insecure. We all wonder if we can make a great mix. We all wonder if we can make a great production. We all wonder if we're going to get another job. We all wonder if we can do it again. Was it an accident? Was my hit record on the radio an accident? Did I just get lucky? Or can I do it? Of course you can do it over and over, but even when you do it over and over, you still ask that question, and it's healthy. It's what propels us. It's what keeps us up. It's what makes us go the extra mile. I can't tell you how many times I've left the studio and been at a gas station putting gas in my car and going like, you know what, doesn't sound right in my car. And literally calling up my guys at the studio saying, I'm coming back. And they're like, it's 1:30 a.m. I know. Pull it all back up. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Because it didn't rock my world in the car. It didn't do it for me. When that day comes where you don't care, when you think you have it all figured out, I think it's over. I think that the fact that we're never happy, that we're always going for it, and by the way, it's never ended. We just abandoned it because there's a deadline, because there's no more money, because it has to stop at some point. I think at that point, it's over. When we don't really think, when we think we have it all figured out. That's the day I would worry about. When I'd rather go to the beach, when I'd rather go hang out somewhere than be inside my mixing room, my recording studio, whatever the case is. That's my opinion. So I kind of answered your stereo bus question, but that's what it is. It's basically a combination of all that. So now I'm looking through the questions here for another question. I'll answer a few more questions here. We're getting towards the hour. Let's see here, looking for a question. For you to describe compressors, playing the groove, I answered that question. Let me go down to the newer questions here. Oh gosh, there's so many of them. Wish I could answer everything here. Okay. Yeah, it's asking here from Tim Drum. He's a big fan and he loves the classic sounds on Inspired Recordings. Do I still chase that? And on every recording, is there a chance to surprise yourself? Like it says here, I still chase clean top sounds. Absolutely, I chase sounds. You know the one sound I can never get ever. And you should do this. Go back. There's an artist called Stevie Wonder, if you don't know it. Yeah. And Stevie Wonder has a record called Innovations, I think it's called. Innovations, it might be. It's one of his first records, I believe. But he's playing the drums, and the sound of the cymbals on some of those records are insane. They are so dense and so thick. And you can hear every element of the stick. And is he on the bell, or if he's down here? And it's so like, I can't get that sound. And the closest I can get to that feeling are spot mics, and I did a drum recording for Mix with the Masters. There was a lot I didn't get to, and I tried to cover sort of the classic way of doing it, not everything. But the spot mics on the top, right where the bell is, right where you engage the cymbal, right where the wing nut is. Sometimes if you get that angle just right and add a lot of lower middle, you can get the thickness. But I've never been able to get that sound. That's something I keep chasing. The Queen tom-tom sounds have a lot to do with the heads. Unfortunately, some of the heads that you can buy now are not as good as some of the other heads. If I have a disappointment in my career, is years ago there were drum heads called Ludwig DB 750 and DB 1000. They were opaque white drum head, and they were the best sounding thing I ever heard in my life. And I, since then, have not been able to find those particular drum heads. If you go into some shop and you see DB by Ludwig 750 or 1000, buy them. It will not let you down. They're amazing. As far as the one thing to keep in mind, I just want to say one last thing about the Queen thing. So much of the sound starts at the musician. One thing I've noticed in my career, and this is a dangerous thing to say, but I'm going to say it because some people could argue it or maybe it would insult somebody. But I've noticed that some of the bigger, best drum sounds, solid drum sounds I've ever recorded have big people sitting behind them. And I'm talking about they're tall, they're big, they weigh a little bit. They're not small, skinny people. And the only thing I can think about is that the drumstick connects to their body, and their body is, the cavity of their body is part of the sound. Just like someone sits down at a piano, and how big their hands are, how much pressure they have, really affects how that piano sounds. Their touch on an acoustic guitar. Yes, we can talk about where the pick is towards the front of the hole, sound hole, or the back, or from whether it's on its side, or is it a metal one, is it plastic, is it a medium, is it heavy? Of course, all those things change the sound, but always remember, the sound starts at the musician. That's where it starts. And that's all I was trying to get through on my drum video I did for Mix with the Masters, is the sound starts there. And how you capture it is, of course, important. The mic preamp, the microphone, etc., the equalizer, headroom, where you put the fader, how you combine things, all that, of course, all that matters. But the sound starts with the musician at that instrument. And that's the first place you want to equalize it, alter it, or change it. Or, again, go back to the first part of this webinar, having the ability to observe what is going on. Observation is intelligence. To observe what's going on, and what can I do? What skill set do I have? What tools do I have to capture that or manipulate that in the right way from the onset? Not later, from the onset. Later is a different thing. Later starts to become a caricature of what that was, which is extremely valid, but that's what it is. It's a caricature. And if you capture the original sound in a great way, you even have more ability to make even more cooler and different kinds of caricatures because you have a wider palette from the onset. All right, let's see. I'll answer a couple more questions. As far as the script, this is from Michael. He's asking me if I'll be doing a disc construct with Mix with the Masters. I would assume at some point. We just haven't done that yet. That's a very interesting thing to do, of course, and yeah, absolutely. Oh, got someone here who already responded about Love Indivisions. Yeah, it's really cool. I'm obsessed with those symbols. I just wish I knew how he did it. I don't know if it's just him. Maybe it's the touch I've been talking about. Maybe it's that 70s, rooms that they had that were very dead, drum booths and things. So you had no reflections, and maybe that's what made the thickness, the carpet, the dead element. But even knowing all that, and liking to think of myself as a really great recordist, it's still hell of a capture. I've yet to be able to do it. Same thing for the hi-hat, by the way. And it could also just be great hi-hats. Maybe they had better drumsticks. Maybe the wood was older, better. I don't know. But it's just a truthful confession on my part. Okay, let's do one more question here. Looking through. How much headroom should be left for the master engineer? Actually, if you can, leave it, but it takes guts. Because, of course, we always want to impress everybody with the best mix that we've done, if this is talking about a mix, and that takes guts because it means you can't always push it to the limit. You got to leave some room, and the ear always hears louder is better, effectively. So you should definitely leave room for the mastering, um, because sometimes if you're part of more additional songs in whatever format, you want to be able to manipulate things to make them connect a little bit, even though that's a little bit old thinking because I don't know who listens to the records, but still has some validity. Certainly does even with a mixtape, right? So you should leave some room for the mastering people. Okay, um, that puts us at an hour. I really enjoyed doing this.
Jack, thank you very
Jack,
much. Thank you.
thank you. You're welcome.
It was really cool. Thank you very much, and thank you everybody for tuning in. So see you tomorrow as well for our webinar with Alan Merson and Jack. It was really amazing, and you answered so many questions and so informative. So thank you very much.
All right, guys. See you later. Bye bye.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you.
You got it.